but somehow we would neglect to talk about the most important issues facing our country. And at the top of my list is the reality that in America, we are rapidly becoming an oligarchic form of society.
Welcome back to Drop the Mask. I'm doing my autistic duty to point out everyone who is wrong on the internet. And I've got a really good one for you guys today. Maybe my best one yet. So Bernie is back. Well, okay, he never really went anywhere, but maybe it's just me. I haven't heard anything from this guy for a long time. But suddenly, he's popping up all over my Twitter feed. And I don't hate Bernie Sanders. As far as politicians go, I think he's sincere in his beliefs. He has more principles than at least 90% of them. I just think he's wrong a majority of the time. What he is good at is recognizing some bad trends in American politics. And in that opening clip, he warns in front of the Senate that the US is rapidly becoming an oligarchic form of society. And I actually agree with him there. In fact, I'd say maybe he's underselling it. We're not just becoming an oligarchy, I think we're already there. And it's only getting more powerful. But those policies that Bernie supports don't address that problem. They're going to make it worse. So that's what I want to talk about today. If you don't know Bernie Sanders, I'd find that a little hard to believe, but just in case you need your memory jogged a bit, he's a longtime independent senator from Vermont. He's a self-described democratic socialist. He's fairly good on being anti-war, which I'll give him credit for that. And he ran and was poised to win the Democratic nomination for president in 2016. That was before the party rigged the primary process and cheated him out of it. So much for preserving democracy, right? And it's not unique for the Democrats to do that, of course. We've already seen it twice in this election cycle. Robert Kennedy wanted to challenge Joe Biden in their primaries, but they just refused to allow any votes. And now Kamala Harris has replaced Biden, again, without any kind of primary process, no votes, no pretense that they're trying to make it look like they care about what people think. But I suspect a lot of voters are very comfortable with being told what to do rather than having to think. But I'm getting off topic here, so I'll show you more from that Senate speech so you can hear, in Bernie's own words, what he's all about.
That sounds like an issue we might want to be talking about. We might just want to be asking about how well the economy is doing for ordinary people as opposed to the people on top. And when we ask that question, the answer is pretty clear. The top 1% have never, ever in American history had it so good. They are making money head over heels. What we are seeing at the same time is a working class in this country that is struggling to pay the bills, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to see that their kids get ahead. Over the last 50 years, we have seen a massive transfer of wealth from ordinary Americans to the top 1%. In fact, there has been a shift of $50 trillion going from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. What does that say about American economic policy?
That's a very good question. What does this say about the American economic policy? This has been Bernie's shtick for his whole career. He's been in politics for over 40 years and in Congress for over 30 of those. And the rhetoric hasn't changed. He's always going on about these terrible 1%, the people who control the wealth at the top. And I don't begrudge people for being wealthy. It's how did you get to that point that matters. We'll get into all of that. But he's right about the working class. We are struggling. There has been a transfer of wealth to the big dogs. But how does that happen? That's the question that I want to look at today. So Bernie did this interview with the comedian Theo, and I found it really interesting in a kind of a frustrating way. It's frustrating because they hit right on a lot of the problems with economic systems in America. It's one of those things where the good people on the left, they're almost there. He's got a good start, but he's stuck on this old school socialism mindset that everything you want people to have needs to be provided by the government. It's the idea that the world is a battle between rich versus poor, not control versus freedom. The idea that some things are just so important that only a government can handle it, that they can scientifically manage the needs of everyone and create this perfect ordered society. But of course, those things are exactly the things that you can't leave up to the government. Because even if you're naive enough to believe they have the best intentions, they simply cannot meet everyone's individual needs. So, the topic of healthcare is the major focus of this interview, and it's a perfect example of this ideology and a broken system which will never be fixed by more government intervention. The Theo is eating up what Bernie's saying, like a lot of people do, because they just don't know any better. It sounds good. I think he really does care about this issue, unlike most politicians, and he does point out real problems for people. It's just that the solutions he proposes are completely backward. It's clear he doesn't understand how it got so bad in the first place. So they're talking about the state of healthcare in America and how much it's costing us. So we'll start right there and kick it off with this clip.
Yeah.
We are now spending over $4 trillion on healthcare. We spend double. Here's another point to be made. We spend twice as much per person on healthcare as any other country because it's designed to make money for the insurance companies and the drug companies.
Wait, so explain that to me. So we spend twice as much on healthcare
We are spending right now, Theo?
as any other country
Yes.
per person,
Yes.
but the money isn't going towards them getting, so we'd almost save the money just by.
You got it. All right. Here, example.
Is that
All right?
true?
Yes, it's true. Check it out. It is true. Chairman of the bloody committee. Yes, it is true.
Okay, so this is true. We spend $4 trillion a year on so-called healthcare in the United States. And that's about $13,000 per year per person. And that's just an average. A lot of people have none. So the people that are getting healthcare are spending a lot more. So we spend double or more per capita than any other country. It's a crazy number, and it sounds real bad and scary. And the healthcare industry is deeply corrupted, no doubt about that. So his argument is that if we move to a universal care system like Canada, we'd have everyone covered and we could spend half as much. And maybe there's a little bit of truth to that. Maybe it could get down to the spending level of Canada. But that's only valid if the only two options we're considering are that and the system we have now. So this plan is ignoring a lot of other variables, which are very important in understanding how we got here in the first place. So I want to dissect this because it does get a little complicated. Let's talk about the spending first. Spending more on its own isn't necessarily cause for concern. Combined with other factors, it can be a problem, but by itself, the extra spending is not a problem per se. Is it just that we have more money to spend on it? Or if increased spending means access to new technologies, new innovations in medicine, and more availability of treatments, then more spending can be good. This is what happened in the early part of the 20th century, before the mountains of regulation started to pile up, increasing the cost for people to provide these services. In that case, more spending was good. The problem is elevated costs for the same things at the consumer end. And it does seem to be going up. But why? With everything else that the government generally leaves alone, costs go down over time. Think about something like your TV. When big flat screen HD TVs came out, they cost thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of dollars. But the demand for it was there, and companies figured out how to make them cheaper and better over time. Now you can buy an 85-inch 4K TV at Costco for under $1,000. You could get a 60-inch TV for a few hundred. This same effect has not been allowed to happen with healthcare. For a better comparison, you can look at the school system. We've poured more and more money into public schools, and they aren't getting better. It's the opposite. The worse they get, the more money we throw at it. And we're not better relative to the world in education, and we spend a lot more. So the spending is part of the equation, but the outcomes are a key part of it too. Are people in the US getting healthier because of all this spending and increased access to care? By most, if not all measures, the answer is no. And there's a big problem with the incentive structure of the whole thing, which Bernie starts to get into here.
And but to pick up on that point, what should one of the priorities of a good healthcare system be? It should be to try to keep people healthy. So it should encourage people to have good diet, to do exercise, to stay away from, addictive stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we do a particularly good job on that? Not so much. Because where do the insurance companies make their money? Hey, if you're really sick, pretty good.
Yeah.
We keep you healthy, not so much.
So that's another thing where he's on the right track. Yes, diet and exercise are the two main contributors to your health. In many cases, if you're at the point where you need pharmaceutical intervention, it's because something was wrong with one or both of those things. You're not exercising enough or you're not eating right. Not always. There are plenty of things that happen that are beyond our control. But the system has every incentive to keep you sick so they can sell you their drug treatments, whether or not you need them, and even whether or not they work. I just read this book, Big Pharma, by Anthony Samroff. I'm trying to get him to come on and talk about it, but we'll see. And one of the many surprising things I learned from this book is that doctors are not allowed to prescribe anything that is non-toxic as medicine. The only thing they can suggest to you is pharmaceuticals and surgery. Even if there's a dietary or natural remedy that's proven to work, they can only give you drugs. Drug companies slightly alter working medicines so that they can repatent them and charge a lot more money for it, when a generic brand would work just as well and be many times cheaper. So all these regulations are built into the system by the exact lobbyists that he's talking about. The incentives are all wrong, but you're not going to stop people from talking to politicians. No matter what restrictions you put in place, they'll find a way around it. They'll become a lot more discreet, and then following that money trail will be much, much harder. At least now there's some visibility into where that money comes from and where it goes. But this is still not attacking the root problem. We'll get to that. But what's Bernie's answer here? Providing government health care to everyone.
All right, you're a smart guy. You tell me, how often have you heard a discussion in this country about how broken the healthcare system is and comparing it to other countries?
A lot.
All right, you've heard a lot about this?
Well, I think I hear a lot about, I look into it a lot.
All right, you look into it, but how many people even know that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee healthcare to all people? So when people say, oh, Bernie Sanders is a radical idea, he thinks everybody should have healthcare. Really? That exists in Canada, it's in France, in England, in Denmark, in Sweden, in every bloody country on earth, virtually, rich country. So it's not a radical
Even Mars, I heard they have healthcare there now.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, the Mars joke is kind of funny, but it's hilarious that Bernie's surprised. Theo has heard people talking about healthcare. Maybe I'm in my own bubble, but I feel like I hear about it constantly. This has been an issue for decades, that the United States is the one developed country that doesn't provide universal health care. This was a key issue that Obama ran on, and he got the Affordable Care Act passed that moved us closer to it. Then Republicans fought against it for so long, and eventually they got rid of the individual mandate. And it just comes up all the time. Bernie says we never talk about it, and that just doesn't seem true to me. It's just that for a lot of people, the answer to socialized healthcare system is a hard no. But there are problems with the insurance model that we use here. We can just leave the government's role out of it for now. Let's talk about private insurance. A lot of people equate insurance with healthcare, and that's already leading us down a bad path. If you're buying insurance, you're making a bet that the money you pay in over the years will be less than what medical care you might unexpectedly need at some point in the future. And because the costs of care are so high, this isn't a bad bet to take. But having a third party, your insurance company, pay for things means you're not paying attention to prices. That means prices for care will go up because you're not worried about it when insurance is paying. And maybe insurance pays up to a certain amount for a specific treatment. Doctors know this and they'll charge that full amount. They can also bill you more on top of it. So you'll see a bill that says, hey, insurance paid $5,000 for this, but maybe you have another $1,000 on top that comes out of your pocket. But in your head, you're thinking, wow, this could have been $6,000 out of my pocket. I just saved $5,000. I'm lucky I have insurance. But it's that splitting up of the bill that makes it seem palatable, even when the doctor might otherwise have been happy to accept $5,000 for the service or even less. If people just paid cash for services, then they couldn't get away with that. Very few people could afford a $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 treatment. So doctors will have to compete with each other on prices, and you will see costs come way down. And this isn't just hypothetical. There are real examples of hospitals doing this right now. And in fact, they bring up price transparency here.
Because I have a group that I've worked with, done volunteer stuff with, called Power to the Patients, right?
Good.
And it's notating the prices of,
Good.
like, say you get an MRI, like the hospital now has to let you know that the MRI is $700, so you can call the hospital down the street and see that there
Good.
it's $550, so you can make a choice, so you know up front.
That's good.
So you're not getting a $10,000 bill later on.
You got it. It's called the transparency bill.
Transparency bill. And is it passed yet or no?
No, it has not. I'm working with it with a guy named Senator Braun from Indiana, who's a Republican. Good guy. And look, it's exactly the issue. People walk into an emergency room. They walk into a hospital. Do you have any idea? Here, Theo, this is what we're going to do for you, blah, 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 blah. And you come out and you drop dead because you see a bill of tens of thousands of dollars, right?
That's the crazy part. Yeah.
So this is one good thing that they're advocating here. For the reasons I just explained, if you're seeing the price up front, you're more likely to shop around. But when insurance covers most of your costs anyway, you're not as incentivized to do that. And in an emergency, of course, you might not even have the time to do that. So this is a big issue for people because the system is broken. It's working very well to make doctors and pharmaceutical companies very rich. But for the people who need help, it's way too expensive. Bernie and Theo talk about it bankrupting people for going in for surgery or something, and that's very true. So they're onto something by saying that the system we have is very good for the insurance companies and the drug companies, and they fight very hard to make sure it stays that way. But where do they take that fight? So let's go back to the tape again, because Bernie's again on the right track with one of the biggest problems with American healthcare.
If you're a large corporation or you represent the pharmaceutical industry, do you know how many lobbyists there are in Washington, D.C. representing the big drug companies? Take a wild and crazy guess.
2,000.
You got it. That's a pretty good guess. About 1,800.
Wow.
So there are 100 members of the Senate and 435 members of the House. Got it? 535. And you got 1,800 lobbyists. Well-paid, former leaders of the Democratic Party, leaders of the Republican Party. They're there to say, hey, Congress, do everything you can to make sure we make as much money as possible, and who gives a damn whether people can afford the prescription drugs they need. So that's power.
So you have a whole other drug government almost going on.
Absolutely.
That's even bigger than our own government. Numbers-wise.
Well, not big. Well, we could define what we mean by bigger. But
That's fair.
But if you look at Wall Street, the power of Wall Street, the drug companies, the insurance companies, the fossil fuel industry, you have enormous wealth, enormous power. And if your question is it government that tells them what to do, or they tell what the government to do? More the latter. They tell the government what to do. Very powerful.
Yes, there are thousands of lobbyists, 1,800 pharmaceutical representatives alone, according to Sanders, that are spending millions, even billions of dollars to get the government to do what is good for pharma companies, not what's good for people's health. And they're very often former politicians who know exactly how to game the system in their favor. This is a problem. But we're still not getting to why exactly. And Bernie even says at the end there, the reality is that more often it's these big moneyed interests telling the government what to do, not the other way around. That's the oligarchy he's talking about. But he doesn't take it to the next logical step, which is, why is it in these companies' best interest to throw money at politicians rather than to put it back into their business, to lower prices and gain a bigger market share, or even just pay themselves more, not that they should. The only reason they can go and spend so much money lobbying the politicians is because they know they can get multiple times the value back in return. They want politicians to regulate the industry because they can make it work for them. They can make rules to keep competition out. They can make rules that say doctors have to follow certain standards and protocols that always lead to their drugs or their treatments being used. And they can do that regardless of how effective those drugs are. They can, and very often do, make people's health problems worse. And the government approach to healthcare system is analogous to the healthcare system's approach to medicine. Treat the symptoms without ever analyzing what the real root cause is. You have a headache? Here's a painkiller. Don't worry about how you got the headache in the first place. It's the same for government. Oh, people can't afford healthcare? Let's throw money at it and give it to them. Don't worry about why people need so much healthcare in the first place. People are struggling with student loan debt? Let's just cancel it. Don't worry about how they fudged up the college system to begin with. And don't worry about any economic side effects that might have. Now, it would be tempting to blame this on capitalism and a free market, but that isn't what we have. Yes, it's not 100% government run, which Bernie wants. It's worse. It's that oligarchy that Bernie was warning about. Let's hear what he has to say about the Canadian system as an example.
Step further.
Okay.
Let me talk about the Canadian system. All right.
Okay.
Simple system. You pay taxes. And progressive. The more you make, the more you pay. But everyone pays taxes. All right. End result is you walk into the hospital, you sign your name, you get all the treatment you need. And it's good quality healthcare. You don't have to argue with insurance companies. You get the care that the doctors think you need. End of discussion. And in my view, that's the way it should be. It's not just that the insurance companies make huge profits. They do. Not just they pay their CEOs exorbitant salaries, which they do. Everybody's got to fill out 1,000 different forms, right? Goes crazy, filling out forms to see what you're entitled to, what you're not entitled to. So we have a system that works very well for the insurance companies and the drug companies. In some cases, you're going to pay 10 times more for medication in America than they do in other countries. That's a whole other story we're trying to deal with right now.
Oh, it sounds so simple. You just pay taxes, and the end result is you get the care that the doctors think you need. End of discussion. There's already a problem there. And this is not unique to a fully public healthcare system either, by the way, but the care the doctors think you need can be very different from the care you actually need. There seems to be a problem of people thinking of healthcare as just a uniform thing. You go into the doctor and they say, oh, you need 2.3 healthcare units, and you get your prescription and you go on your way, cured of all ills. Of course, that's nonsense. Cures are rare. Diseases are not simple. And everyone's different. Even people with the same diagnosis will need different treatments and approaches to health. Not being able to go to a doctor isn't the reason most people are sick. Simplifying healthcare down to this level is one of the problems with what Bernie's talking about here. Just look at the outcomes we have. Yes, it's very expensive, but we have the most advanced healthcare in history. We have all kinds of drugs and doctors all over the place. But for the last several years, things have been getting worse. People are much less healthy. Life expectancy is going down. So the money is not correlated directly with the outcome. But also, if you're talking about a single-payer universal care system, it doesn't solve the incentive problem. It's creating a complete monopoly on insurance, run by the federal government, who has very little incentive to meet your needs. They don't know your individual needs. A one-size-fits-all solution means you're going to get the lowest common denominator level of service. If you've been in these systems, you know. As bad as the US is sometimes, it can be worse in other places. You can wait months or years to see a doctor. They still have to decide what they will or won't cover, which doctors you can see and when. They have to manage payments and billing to doctors and hospitals, but government bureaucrats aren't going to have the incentive to get the best deal on anything. They get paid no matter what. People like to think that you can eliminate the profit incentive, but you're just moving it to people who don't have any reason to care. Government is going to take or print its own money, whether they provide a good service or not. Insurance companies will fail if they aren't serving their customers. So with a single payer system, there's no opting out. There's no other option. So when it sucks, you can't just go to another company. They're taking your money, whether you consent or not. And this is what people advocating for this don't get. And Bernie seems to think that it's just the existence of greedy rich people that makes it all go bad. So let's see a little more into that side of it and see what he says.
It's worse now, and I'll tell you why. As a result of this Citizens United Supreme Court decision, you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
So people brought action, billionaires really brought action. They said, hey, it's undemocratic. You're taking away my freedom of speech, right? I got a First Amendment right. We're on TV now. You could say whatever you want to say, and I'm a billionaire, and I want to spend unlimited sums of money to defeat this candidate or support this candidate, and you have laws on the books now which restrict my freedom to buy the election. You understand what I'm saying?
100%.
Okay. And the Supreme Court said, well, guys, you're right. You're billionaires. You should be able to spend as much money as you want to buy elections. And that's what you have. So right now, this is literally the truth. You have super PACs where billionaires can put unlimited amounts of money, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat people they don't like or to support people they do like. That's power. And that is a corruption of what democracy is supposed to be. Okay? And what that Supreme Court decision said is what Congress did was unconstitutional, denied big money their freedom of speech. If you're a billionaire, you have freedom of speech. That means you can run ads all over the day and to beat Bernie Sanders, beat anybody. And that's what happened.
Okay, so there's a lot here. Bernie's complaint is a common left-wing talking point about the case Citizens United versus the FEC. Citizens United is a Supreme Court decision that said corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money in politics as long as they're not coordinating with the campaign. So Bernie talks about PACs and super PACs here. Those are political action committees that pay for ads and various things for politicians running for office. The decision was ruled as a free speech issue, and I think it's a stretch to fit it into the First Amendment. If anything, it's a freedom to do what you want with your own money issue. And if I were a shareholder of companies that are doing this, I'd be pretty pissed until you see that return they get back. Just putting money into politicians rather than giving a dividend doesn't really make you happy. But people don't really pay attention to that. And it's become very normal for companies to donate money to political campaigns on both sides. So should that be limited? Here's some more from Bernie on campaign finance.
And how do we change that?
Well, first of all, this campaign finance reform is a big deal. Just this one issue, and I'm glad you raised it. We got to do away with the Citizens United. We have to have restrictions, okay? When I ran for president, the average contribution was $27, okay? Roughly speaking. And we got millions of people to contribute. So I think there has to be a real stringent limit on the amount of money that any individual can put into the political process. And I also believe that we should move to what we call public funding of elections.
Stringent limits on campaign funding. That's the plan. And that sounds nice, but I don't think it's going to help. There's always a loophole. And right at the end there, he throws in that there should be public funding for it. Now, you probably know my opinion on that. There's no such thing as public money. It's all money that has been stolen from you without your consent. So I'm a hard no on that. Giving money to campaigns is kind of ridiculous. It's paying for someone to win the right to rob you. They're already taking your money. Why do you want to give them more to get to that position where they can do it legally? So anyway, might we be better off had the Citizens United decision gone the other way? Maybe. But again, we're not getting at the real issue. Bernie complains that billionaires have an outsized influence on politics. And that's not wrong. They absolutely do. But why? It's because of the power that they're lobbying to. If you're rich, you can have massive influence on the things that create an unfair advantage. It's the government. The political class makes the rules that make their donors happy. If we had a free market, the only way for corporations to make money is to provide a good or service to people at a price they're willing to pay. And that's so far off from the political world and the world of medicine that we live in. And Bernie talks about that fact in this next clip.
That's power. And that is a corruption of what democracy is supposed to be. Look, you and I can disagree on an issue, all right? 10 people. We argue it out, we vote, I get the majority, you get the majority, somebody wins, somebody loses. I don't think billionaires should be able to buy elections.
Do you think that our election process is still democratic? Do you think it's still...
Yes and no. I mean, you want to run for office. Can you? Yeah, you can. You got a certain number of signatures. But if you're going to win, and I have 10 times more money than you do, I will beat you 95% of the time.
Wow.
I mean, that's a fact, right?
Right, yeah, 100%.
You'll beat
yeah.
me. Maybe if you're really an exceptional candidate and I'm a real idiot, you will beat me once in a while. But by and large, the money people will win. So if you're asking me, are we a democracy? In one sense, we are. All right, you can run for office. You can raise your issues. On the other hand, in terms of who has the real power, money people do. And I use the term oligarchy. An oligarchy is a society where small numbers of very wealthy people control the economic and political life of the country. I think we are moving rapidly in that direction.
Yeah, so back to the oligarchy comment. I do think he's correct. Like I said, we are in an oligarchic system, but this is not just because some people have money. There's always going to be some people with more in any system. So no, inequality isn't the main issue here. This is a fundamental flaw of democracy, because someone is always voting against your interest. And to think that it must be all or nothing, either my guy wins and I get what I want, or your guy wins and you get what you want, someone is always going to be unhappy. And it doesn't need to be that way. Bernie says we still have a democratic system, but it's bought. People with money win. The amount of money in political campaigns is absolutely nuts. So again, you have to ask why that is. Why are people willing to spend millions and billions of dollars for their guy to win office? Is it just because they want to help people? I don't think so. They do it because the power to control is there. They want that power to control markets so they can continue to rake in more and more money. The root cause is the control at the top of the political hierarchy. And we've been so trained to think that we need them doing these things that people don't even question it. They're looking at symptoms and thinking that is the disease. But the disease is the government. So how do they do this? Theo is lamenting the process, wondering why we don't just do something. Why don't we just give people free healthcare? This is the fault of the media, apparently. This is what Bernie says.
Look, the bad news is bad news and good news. The good news is you got a program, and but millions of people tune into you.
Yeah.
And part of that is that people do not necessarily believe CBS, NBC, ABC, or even Fox or anybody else. And so let me tell you what I think about that. Because I think you're touching on an important issue. We talk about healthcare, you talk about media. You have about 8 large media conglomerates, Comcast and all these guys. They're huge.
Serious.
Exactly. They own, people turn on their
Clear Channel.
You got it. They're huge. They don't own one station. They own radio stations. They own TV stations.
Miserable.
They own movies, producers. So these are owned by very large billionaires, big companies owned by billionaires. And they will discuss issues from here to here. All right, I gave you an example about Medicare for all. We should be having a tremendous discussion why we're the only country on earth not to guarantee healthcare. It doesn't take place on television.
Okay, so he's right about the ownership of the media. He's on the right track again. I talked about this in my Enemy of the People episodes. It's a few big companies that control basically all of the traditional media. But to say healthcare doesn't get talked about, what world is he living in? It's always being talked about. You can just go on CNN's YouTube channel, search for healthcare. You'll find 100 results. A lot of them are clips of Bernie himself. So what do you mean it's not talked about? I mean, okay, if you want to say that there's no substance behind it on the TV news, yeah, that's true, but that's everything on the TV news. It's little sound bites with no substance. And I think this is why people are rejecting it in favor of longer form conversations, like the one that Bernie is in. Because even though I don't agree with him on most things, Bernie's bringing an argument, making a full case, and gets asked real questions about it. Not just saying, oh, Republicans are evil, blah, blah, blah. So, the media is a little club with big biases run by a few rich people. Yes, it's also overwhelmingly sponsored by big pharma companies who would absolutely love programs like universal healthcare. They made sure Obamacare happened because it was a big boon for them. Because instead of having to convince consumers to buy their products, it's now mandated by the government, and they're guaranteed to get paid. And the reason we have the problem of a few media companies that had such a stranglehold on the news for so long, again, goes back to government regulation. It's not just that people are rich and therefore they could buy up control of the market. It's that they're rich so they can control the regulators and keep people out of the market. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, was created in 1934 under FDR's presidency to control what could be seen and heard in the media. Allegedly, it was meant to keep obscenity off the airwaves, but his administration used it to pull broadcasting licenses from people that would criticize his policies. Even before that, the Radio Act of 1927 nationalized broadcasting. Essentially, the federal government just said, we now own all radio and television channels. It would then sell you a license back to a privately owned station, but of course, that means you have to play ball. You have to abide within a narrow window of acceptable discourse, or you're out. And creating this power is what brings the money in. We're back to the same problem, giving the government this power over who gets to speak, who gets to share their opinions to a wide audience, is how these monopolies get created. And maybe worse, is that it creates a situation where only pro-government voices get amplified, and it lets them get away with more and more malfeasance. So the problem is that government creates monopolies, and Bernie's worried about these monopolies, but only in the private sector, which I think is a huge mistake.
And we started this discussion, you talk about, privatized communism, whatever the expression you used, is I believe that, Medicare is the health insurance program for the elderly. Mm-hmm. Medicaid is for lower income people. I think we should combine all these and guarantee health care to all people. But your point is that in the private sector, we are moving to a monopoly, and it's true. People like United Health, unbelievable. United Health, to the best of my knowledge, has under contract or hires 10% of the doctors in America.
Okay, so Bernie here is advocating to combine Medicare and Medicaid into one thing and put everyone under it. Then in the very next sentence, he's complaining that United Healthcare has a 10% market share in hiring doctors. So his answer is to take it to 100% in one company. This is the big contradiction in the whole thing. All the problems that he's pointing out, most of which are real problems, are not because we just let the market run wild. It's not a free market at all. It's very controlled. And the answer isn't to lock it down further. The answer is to just let it be free. So the opposition to universal health insurance policies are usually portrayed as just evil capitalists who only care about money. It's usually people on the right that argue against this, but they don't do a good job. So the left just says, oh, you don't want people to have access to healthcare. You don't want poor people to have anything. But no one thinks like that. It's completely wrong. People like Bernie will make emotional arguments about healthcare being a human right, but no, sorry, it isn't. A right is not something you force other people to perform for you. You have a right to yourself, your body, your speech, your thoughts. You even have a right to be healthy if you're willing to take that responsibility. But you do not have a right to someone else's labor. And by gaming the system to make them do a job for you at the expense of robbing your neighbors through taxes, that's exactly what you're doing. This is not what rights are. This is indentured servitude. So what's wrong with government-run healthcare is exactly what's wrong with government-run anything. Government has a monopoly on driver's licenses, for example. Does anyone think the DMV is a good place to go? Do they provide great service? No. Government has a monopoly on police forces. How many times in the last few years have we seen police harassing and murdering citizens for the most minor of offenses? There's no opt-out for the state's police force. You can't take your money over to a private security company instead, and it'll be the same with healthcare. So you have to remember that, for one thing, the healthcare system is not incentivized to keep people healthy. If we move to more government control, that's only going to enable this more. We're funding a system that does not produce good outcomes. And the target for single payer is simply to make sure people have insurance. It does nothing to fix the root problem. So when you hear people speak out against government healthcare, government education, or anything like that, it's not because we don't want people to have healthcare or to be educated. It's that the government is one of the worst ways to provide it. And so many people could have cheap, easy healthcare if we don't lock ourselves into this socialized nightmare. The government cannot possibly weigh the individual concerns and needs of 350 million people and build a system that works for everyone. This applies to healthcare as well as everything else. The best thing they can do is get out of the way. Instead, they want to bake in the crappy incentives that an insurance system brings by making it a total monopoly. But we could have very cheap, very effective care if we would allow people to act in their own interest. Don't give the billionaires an option to game the system. Don't give them people to lobby to. Don't legislate in ways that favor big business over small business. Bernie talks about a wealth transfer. Well, we saw the biggest wealth transfer in history in the last 4 years with COVID policy, because the government decided which businesses would be allowed to function and which would not. $4 trillion is the estimate of how much money was transferred to the top 1%. And this is the best example because it's so clearly a direct effect of government intervention. All these things, healthcare, education, broadcasting, they all existed before government tried to monopolize them. This is what they do. They take over something that's working, then they take credit for the advances that were already happening, and then, when that progress runs out, because they put a chokehold on innovation, they think the funding is the problem, and they throw more money at it, and more money, and more money, until it collapses under itself. And then, no one gets healthcare. That's what I want to avoid, and what I wish socialists like Bernie Sanders could get through their heads. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show today. Thanks as always for watching Drop the Mask. Follow me on X at DropTheMaskPod, and I'm pretty interactive there, so if you just leave a comment, want to say hey, feel free. Peace.